You know, in the final, desperate month of the Spanish Civil War, the Republic wasn't just facing an enemy at the gates, it was imploding from within. We're about to dissect the critical military and political chain reaction between February and March of 1939 that really sealed its fate. And it all centered on one absolutely vital port city, Cartagena. Now, this entire analysis is drawn from the incredible, meticulous research of Colonel Rodrigo's Batallas Guerra Civil project. So we're not just telling a story here, we are breaking down the military strategy almost minute by minute based on some seriously expert analysis. All right, so here's how we're going to trace this collapse. First, we'll set the scene for you in February 1939. Then, we'll get into the deep internal divide that was tearing the Republic apart. We'll look at the government's last-ditch power play, the rebellion that it sparked, and finally, we'll witness the absolutely fatal departure of the Republican fleet. So, to really understand why everything just fell apart, you gotta look at the pieces that were still on the board. What did the Republic actually have left to fight with in February of '39? Well, their single most important asset, hands down, was the Cartagena naval base. I mean, look at it. It had this incredibly well-protected harbor, powerful fortifications. It was the very heart of the Republic's remaining military power. This base was the key to any continued resistance or even a potential mass evacuation. And Cartagena wasn't just a port, it was a fortress. Everything was under a single, unified command. It had these fearsome coastal artillery pieces. We're talking massive 38-centimeter guns. It had ground troops, and most importantly, it had the bulk of the Republican Navy, all under the command of Admiral Miguel Buiza. But here's the thing. Inside this fortress, the actual will to fight was just crumbling. After years of war, relentless bombardment, the morale of both the soldiers and the civilians had completely hit rock bottom. The overwhelming feeling wasn't about victory anymore. It was just, end the war, please. And this created a real powder keg of dissent. And this brings us to the central conflict. And it wasn't really against the nationalists at this point. It was a battle for the soul of the Republic itself. A fatal split had emerged right at the highest levels of command, dividing them over the very strategy for survival. So on one side, you had President Juan Negrín's government. Their strategy was simple: resist at all costs. They believed that if they could just hold out, with Europe marching towards another world war, it would give them leverage for a negotiated peace, something better than unconditional surrender. But on the other side, you had this growing conspiracy of military officers, led by Colonel Sigismundo Casado, and they saw things very differently. For them, continued resistance was a sterile, pointless sacrifice that would only lead to more death. They wanted peace, and they wanted it now. And this wasn't just some army conspiracy either. The commander of the fleet, Admiral Buiza, he voiced this exact feeling directly to President Negrín. He said, "One cannot resist for the sake of resisting, prolonging a sterile sacrifice." When Negrín asked if this was just his opinion, Buiza's reply was chilling. It's that of the entire fleet. Think about that. The Republic's most powerful military asset was openly on the side of the peace faction. Okay, so faced with this growing opposition, Negrín's government made a critical move. And it wasn't just a retreat, it was a strategic repositioning. It was designed to launch a counterattack against the conspirators from a whole new seat of power. At the end of February, the government packed up and left Madrid for a new headquarters called Position Justa. Now, its location was no accident. It was positioned near a reliable airfield, for a quick getaway if needed, and it was within striking distance of the fleet in Cartagena, an asset Negrín knew he absolutely had to control. From Justa, Negrín planned what was basically a political strike. His objective was crystal clear: surgically remove Casado's faction in Madrid from the chain of command and reassert total government authority over the entire military. And here's exactly how he planned to do it. On March 3rd, the official diary published a series of decrees. But this wasn't just some administrative shuffling. Oh no, this was a political decapitation. First, dissolve the Army Group Command, which effectively stripped Casado of his power. Second, appoint a loyalist, Colonel Francisco Galán, to take control of the Cartagena base. Then, place loyal officers in key provincial commands and promote others known to support the government. It was a decisive and, let's be honest, a deeply provocative move. But Negrín's gambit, it backfired spectacularly. Instead of neutralizing the conspiracy, his decrees acted as a trigger, igniting open rebellion in the two centers of dissent at the exact same time. Just look at how fast things escalated. On March 2nd, Casado confronts Negrín and basically tells him he doesn't recognize his authority.
The very next day, Negrín issues his decrees, and Casado goes into open disobedience. By March 4th, as Casado was ignoring repeated orders to report to headquarters, a parallel rebellion explodes in Cartagena. That was it. The point of no return had been crossed.
And you have to understand, these weren't two separate events. It was a coordinated rebellion along a Madrid-Cartagena axis. The political military plot in Madrid and the naval uprising in Cartagena were two fronts of the same internal war, and it was tearing the Republic's command structure right in half. And in Cartagena, the conspiracy ran deep. It included the head of the powerful coastal artillery, the chief of the naval arsenal, the base chief of staff, even the head of civilian services. And crucially, they all had the unspoken support of Admiral Buiza and the fleet, who really saw this rebellion as the only path to peace. So this internal war, this fighting within the naval base itself, led directly to the single greatest strategic loss for the Republic, the self-neutralization of its own navy. On March 5th, with fighting raging between Republican factions inside Cartagena, Admiral Buiza made a fateful decision. He was afraid his ships would be trapped by Negrín's new loyalist commander, so he ordered the entire fleet to sail. But they weren't sailing to fight the nationalists. They were sailing for internment in French North Africa. In a single, devastating move, the Republic's last strategic asset had just removed itself from the war. And this brings us to the final, stark question. Once the command structure was broken by a civil war within a civil war, and the fleet, their ultimate bargaining chip, was gone, was there any strategic path left? Was any outcome other than total, unconditional surrender even possible at that point?